Hey everybody, welcome to the webinar where we're going to be sharing with you how we are defending against nation state level attackers. And the really good news that I've got for everyone is that you can do it. It's actually a fight that you can win. And what we're going to be doing is walking you through some of the techniques that are tried and true, that I've worked at some of my clients, that John has worked at our clients, his clients, and we're here to tell you it's very, very doable. And a big part of it is that you're going to have to reframe a lot of what it is in order to do the defensive work. So, first of all, we've got a whole lot of stuff to cover and not a whole lot of time to go over it, okay? So, the first thing that we're going to be doing is there's a document that has informed a lot of our thought patterns. And if you've been following us on Twitter recently, we've been teasing this a lot. There's this is your path to victory. And what we're going to be doing is making references to it. I'm going to move on in the interest of time, but you'll love this thing. I'm super proud of it. John, thank you so much for all your help in making this a reality. It's amazing. The other thing, too, is we need to have a little bit of a reset on what it is to be online in the 21st century. You are a target. You might not be the target of a nation state, but you are a target. And we'll talk about how to deal with that. And then we're going to use that better understanding of how attackers gun for us as a lens to look through this guide. And then we're going to give you some strategies for success. So okay, first things first. A lot of people, when it comes to this sort of stuff, they're in full on crisis mode. And I get that. If you just want the checklist and you're saying, hey, I need that path to victory, we've got you, okay? So the way it works is out on the SANS blog site. If you go to sans.org/blog, you'll see that there's this Ukraine-Russia Conflict Cyber Resource Center, which is a bit of a mouthful, but anything that's pertaining to the current situation in Ukraine is going to be here. So links to this recording, links to the document that we're going to be talking about, all of it is here. So you're going to have everything that you need in one easy one-stop shopping. Now, I would encourage you to, if you're in true crisis mode, just go ahead and drop. You can watch this conversation later, download that PDF, and you're going to be off to the races. But what I would encourage you to do is actually lean in, and we're going to start talking about some different and more interesting things, okay? Now, one item that I want to point out is, hey, I'm Mick. Well, I'm not talking. John is going to be available. John, hey, why don't you introduce yourself to folks?
John Gorenflo, I'm a certified instructor with SANS Institute. I'm the founder and principal and consultant of Fundamental Security. Focus more on the offensive things, so I definitely see things through that lens. But offense has to inform defense. So knowing how I attack networks, how I attack applications, it kind of informed how we went about the process of figuring out what to do now to defend your network. So that's kind of the angle we're going to take with it and the perspective I come from.
Yep. And hi, my name is Mick Douglas. I'm an instructor for SANS as well, and I'm the founder of InfoSec Innovations. And we do have offensive capabilities, but we believe offense should inform defense, and defense should inform offense. It's like the cycle, right? And so we do a lot of defense that is informed on the things that we learn through incident response and our pen tests. So this is going to be very nitty-gritty, tactical, real-world stuff that we're going to be covering. Now, John and I are going to be taking turns talking, and you may even hear John like interrupt me while I'm talking because he's totally cool like that. John, feel free to do so. And while that's happening, I'm going to be monitoring the chat. He's going to be monitoring the chat. So if you have questions, we'll address them. In the event that we don't get to your questions in time, we're going to hit them up on Twitter, LinkedIn, whatever. So reach out. We want to make sure that this is an interactive and rewarding experience for everyone. So, all joking aside, I was going to put some kind of joke about like, hey, it's kind of boring in cybersecurity land, and there's anything but, right? My heart and prayers go out to the folks in Ukraine, and it's a very weird moment in history right now, and a lot of organizations are wondering, what does this mean? Like, how do we deal with this reality? And depending on where you are in the world right now, will impact how things are for you. So, right now, it's very highly fluid. I would recommend that you keep your head on a swivel, as it were. If you are outside of the Eastern European region and you don't do business in the Eastern European region, chances are you might not be a primary target of Russia backed attacker groups, but you still are a target. Whether you're realizing it or not, there's a lot of similarity from what's happening right now to what was happening a month ago, what was happening a year ago. If you are online, you are exposed. And so, what we're going to do is give you, whether you're a very small org or a very large org, we're going to give you some thought patterns that you can use at your org that will help set you up for victory. One thing that I do want to point out is that I have seen that there has been a dramatic rise in social engineering attacks. A lot of fraudsters are pretending to be, various groups like, faking Doctors Without Borders or Red Cross. And so we are starting to see some initial incursions into networks coming from that angle. So you may want to take shields up from a social engineering perspective. And that's something that we are not going to cover. This is a little more tech forward uh, webinar. So I hope you already have social engineering planning and screening training for your folks. Activate that now if you haven't already. One item that makes me a little upset is that there's a lot of well meaning but frankly bad advice that's out online. We're seeing everything from people saying, oh, this is just another day on the internet because the nation state attackers were attacking, you know, on February 14th, Valentine's Day. They were doing it on February 1st. And while that's true, I think that there's a little more urgency to that. Um, one one item that you should be aware of is that even if your attacks actually don't shift, you still should be using this as an opportunity to potentially implement lasting change within your organization. Now, I want to be clear, I'm not advocating that you increase the panic level or raise the temperature. A lot of people are nervous already. You don't need to do that. That's not what we're advocating. But what I am saying is that if somebody comes to you and says, "Hey, are we a target?" you can say, "Well, we are, but here's some things that we have done, and here's some things that we are going to do." And so you may want to take notes as things go on, and I hope you take very, very heavy notes on the doc that we've put together. So over the last couple days, and John, have put together a list of what we think are the most critical things you can do to defend against both run-of-the-mill attackers to the very high-end state-sponsored attackers and everything in between. Now, John, I don't know what your take is on this, but I feel like this was a lot of effort, and I feel like what we've done is we've put together a really cool resource. And the one thing that I want everybody to understand is that you can absolutely win as the defender. John, what's your take on that?
No, it's absolutely possible. The challenge, and it was the hardest part about this, and I think part of what one of the themes you'll catch here is that it's not perfect, right? There is no such thing as perfect here, but we looked at it and said, listen, if you're already behind from the point of view of security, and suddenly you are staring down the digital barrel of a nation state attacker, what do you do? I mean, you're years behind. You've got a lot of catching up to do, and now you're up against the apex predators of the internet. What can you do? And so, figuring out how to make that a a bite-sized list or at least immediate action things that you can take without, one, putting you or your organization at unnecessary risk, but two, are also just deadly effective at preventing attackers from succeeding along their attack paths. And so getting that down to 6 things was a bit of a challenge.
It
And I think
was.
where we are here is it's a great starting point. I mean, we looked at a few different frameworks, things that maybe we base it here, maybe we point people to that. No, that's too much. And kind of where we landed was these are the things that if we absolutely had to, if we knew we were under attack, this is what we would do right now.
Hmm. Yep, absolutely. And if you're looking at the slide right now, folks, what you're seeing is what reality is for most organizations, right? You are running around with your hair on fire day in, day out. And part of the reason why is that there's this cycle of problems. And at each step, like starting off at the 12 o'clock position, the attacker does something, they make some success. That creates a flood of alerts, which then causes response fatigue. I mean, my goodness, how many times have we seen in the press where there was a very major breach or some kind of incursion and there was ample evidence, but because it was lost in the shuffle, we didn't see it, right? Once you have that response fatigue, you're missing the daily blocking and tackling, that care and feeding stuff like applying patches, doing good firewall rule validation, change management, things that frankly are kind of boring but really important. And so then, as a result of not doing that stuff, little wonder that we have our vulnerabilities increase, our exposure increases, which then breeds more attack success. And when I was putting together this document, you know, I didn't share this with John, so this might be a little shock to him. But when I was putting together this part of this document, I got really quite depressed because it almost felt like this was a foregone failure. And one of the things that I've noticed is on the interactions I've had on Twitter, for instance, a lot of people have this defeatist attitude. And I cannot stress hard enough that you need to chuck that to the curb. You have got to change your thinking. And the reason why is at each and every point in this cycle here that you're seeing, at each and every point, you can choose to do better. Now, a lot of this conversation, our time together, we're going to show you some options on how to do better, but you might know of things that will be more effective at your org. And what's interesting is if you lower the attacker success rate, you're going to get fewer alert floods, which makes the alerts more targeted, which, because the alerts are more targeted, you're going to have more focused response. You can very easily create this positive feedback loop. And I know that this is probably really odd, and this might be even anti intuitive if you're really deep into this failure mindset. You're probably thinking, oh, not us, we can't win. What I want you to do is go back to that failure mode, right? I'm going back a slide. There's probably one of these that you're like, you know, we might not be able to solve it, but we might be able to make it just a little better. Find that one, and what you'll find is make a good stab at it. Fix it. Make it just a touch better. You're not looking for perfect. Just make it a little bit better. And as a result of it being just a little bit better, there's these downstream ripple impacts. And that's what I mean by creating a positive feedback loop. In time, as you get better incrementally, you're going to have a system where the noise starts getting removed. And so what we've got is a list of how you can go about removing that noise. John, why don't you
Yeah,
take
real
it?
quick, if you can go back a slide there, Mick.
Yes, sir.
Um, these 2 slides that Mick was talking about, there's a great question that we saw come in from YouTube. And Pookie asks, if you focus on lateral movement detection, doesn't that pretty much cover everything? I mean, I'm not saying don't focus on lateral movement, but if you're focusing only on lateral movement, it means they're already in your network. And that's kind of giving up the perimeter or not establishing that perimeter at first. And it's not that you're ever going to keep them out perfectly. You absolutely have to have some detection and response capabilities for lateral movement. But hey, let's go patch the simple things that are on the internet. Let's go take away the easy victories for the attacker and make them work to get access in the first place, right? Lateral movement, yeah, that's a thing that the attackers are going to do, but what if the system that they really want to get access to, or maybe the system in your environment that they're using as a part of an attack against somebody else, didn't require lateral movement? Right? There's a lot of other things you have to think about beyond just bits and pieces. That's why it's never just as easy as do 1, 2, and 3 and you're done. Right? Um, Go ahead, Mick. All right. Now, the first thing that we looked at, because we talked about, okay, what do we do? If we're looking at nation state attackers, what do they do? How can we defend against them? And we start off by saying, okay, what do we know that these attackers do? And there's certain techniques that they're going to use. There's going to be password guessing, credential stuffing, all sorts of stuff that I do as a penetration tester that we've seen attackers do for decades. But you know what else attackers have done for decades, and that I do on my penetration tests and all that? I take advantage of weak software, vulnerabilities, poorly configured systems, things that are exposed to the internet and have vulnerabilities that I can easily take advantage of. Now, there's a relatively new project from CISA, which here in the US is um, what is it? The Center for, it's not right. I'm
It's
going to
a
get their acronym wrong.
it's a function of the
Infrastructure
depart.
Security Assist.
Yes, it's a
Yes.
function of the U.S. Department of Homeland Security, who's in
Right.
charge of helping secure the internet for U.S. government and private.
So what they've done is they've compiled this catalog of known exploited vulnerabilities. And so by known exploited means these are vulnerabilities. They have CVEs. There's patches available for them. And they're saying, hey, these are the ones that we know attackers are actively exploiting. Okay, now if you bump this list up against a threat intelligence feed or something like that, um, if you have it, well, fantastic, because then you're going to know, okay, these are the threat groups that are focusing on us potentially, and these are the techniques, these are the exploits they've been known to use. If we look at the 384 different, or excuse me, 383 different vulnerabilities in that catalog, 382 of those can be resolved by installing a patch. Now, you may be sitting here thinking it's kind of like that, is it the Trident commercial with the like 4 out of 5 dentists agree, and like what happened to the fourth dentist or fifth dentist? Yeah, that's kind of where I was. So I was like, okay, what's this one? It's an end of life product. No patches, no nothing for that thing anymore. It's dead. It shouldn't even be on your network, right? So the patch there is like unplugging the cable. Now, patching. Okay, great. Thanks, John. That's real helpful. Everybody said patch from day one. So how do we make this actually doable? We can't just patch everything tomorrow. You're 100% right. Okay, so we're going to talk through here is maybe changing up the prioritization a little bit differently than how you've seen it done in the past. And what we're going to do is focus on it from the attacker's perspective, right? We're going to prioritize the most likely attack paths. Now, we're going to walk through 3 different attack paths here, but it's not the exact attack path that you are going to see, okay? But it is the one that is maybe the most likely or the easiest for the attacker to go after, right? We'll talk about like configuring automatic updates. The automatic updates are available in almost everything anymore. It's almost annoying to some degree if you are an old school IT person who likes to be in control of patching and updates, right? Things like go out and you're like, wait a minute, why did it updated, right? Now, me as a pen tester and like a little bit of security vulnerability research that I do, sometimes like auto updates fix the thing before I get to go hack at the thing, right? Which, I mean, if you want anyone to be frustrated in the world, it's hackers and pen testers, right? We should be frustrated, but unfortunately, a lot of times we're not. But
Also,
automatic
patches.
updates, you
Sorry,
know,
patches are free too.
yes, all right, it is. It's like my favorite 4-letter F word. Okay. So get those patches deployed. Automatic patching. Everything from Windows will do automatic patching all the way through to like, yes, WordPress. It has a reputation, right? It has features in the latest versions. You turn on automatic updates. It patches the WordPress underlying framework. It patches all the plugins. It patches everything. right? So turn those things on. Now, I understand there are some potential issues with that automatic patching process, but right, if you are actually staring down the digital barrel of an attacker that is targeting your company right now, you've got to weigh that risk, right? I'm not saying like by me just patch everything and throw caution to the wind. We have to be realistic about it. And that's why, as much as possible, Mick and I here have tried to give you the way to opt out of taking this as much as we can, as fast as we can approach, because it has risk built into it, right? Um, but if you're already seeing attacks, you might need to move with a little bit riskier moves up front. You'll manually patch where necessary. You'll want to then scan for those CISA known exploited vulnerabilities once you've done at least one round of patching. And when I say scan, this is more than just like run Nessus, run Qualys, run Nexpose, whatever. You need to go hunt for those systems, because typically, and this is a common mistake that I see my clients make, they'll assume they've patched everything because they look at their patching software, their inventory software, and they're like, look, everything's green, all the patches deployed, couple exceptions, but we're on those. I'm like, cool, but you forgot about these 10 systems that I discovered by just doing some basic in-map scans, and you don't seem to be tracking in your inventory stuff at all. And you know what? Those are the systems that stand out to the attackers. They look at your network, and there's going to be portions of the network where everything looks identical, right? Except for 2 or 3 little hosts over here that have a whole bunch of ports that nothing else does. And guess where the attacker is going to go? Because guess what's different? Guess what's probably not the standard configuration? Guess what's probably the exception to policy? Okay. Exception to policy. If your risk handling of something has to do with paperwork, attackers don't care. They don't even know that paperwork exists, right? We're looking for things that stop the attacks from actually working. So we scan, we find, right? We patch, and then we repeat. We kind of go back and start over. Okay. Let's look at the first attack path here. Now, this is just a common network we're going to kind of focus on. We've got a DMZ off to the right side of the screen there, our attacker out there on the internet. We have our internal systems. We have both servers and then client devices. Next slide. Now, prioritizing the common attack paths. First, start with internet accessible systems. Now, these show up in order here, 1 through 4 of your network security appliances, your web servers, web apps, the host OS for all of those things, whatever those are running on. But there's no right answer as to what to patch first, right? This is where we maybe look at CVSS score if you have to, or whatever. Look at the impact of a potential vulnerability, the likelihood that it is or could be exploited, and well, patch that first. Okay, so these go pragmatically through these. Now, the reason this is first is the attackers can directly access these systems and they need no assistance from anybody else. These systems are exposed to the internet because they're supposed to be, right? I mean, to some degree, you have to open these things up to the world, which exposes them to the attackers. And odds are, if you are a target, they've already scanned, right? They already know what systems you have. Then maybe they already have access to them. I don't know. Okay. So you want to focus on this. They already have access to them. A lot of times, what we have out in our DMZs, the firewalls and security appliances, that kind of stuff. Maybe the web server is a Linux server, and the rest of your environment is Windows. There's a lot of variation here. But if you're if the internet exposed systems are a little bit different than your internal systems, there's going to be missing certain products or security controls sometimes. For instance, I don't know anybody that runs EDR on their firewall, right? Because you can't. It's an appliance. It's not running Windows, which is what most EDR platforms require. Okay, so you don't have those detective controls on the operating system of your firewall because most of the time that is an appliance, right? So we've got to keep those things up to date. Similar with other web applications and such, sometimes different security products will cause performance issues or that kind of stuff. People will disable stuff either because they don't know how to tune the security tools, they don't know how to tune the application, the system, whatever. Risk accept, right, to get the systems up and running, keep the business going, right? And then we've got potential issues. So we focus on those, right? A lot of that stuff, if it's something that could be business critical, Even more of a reason that if a security product or operational tool has ever caused an outage there, maybe it just has been removed from that system. And it's one more that we're just missing. Okay. So focus on those internet accessible systems first. Get those patches deployed. I'm not saying do this willy nilly. You need to go through whatever testing is necessary to make sure you're not going to crash things. But all of this needs done. And this is the first thing that I would take time to patch. What do you got,
Now,
Nick?
there is one point though that I want to make is I don't want perfect to be the enemy of good. It is perfectly okay to have 70%, 80% patch coverage and move on to the next zone while you're working on those special machines that are going to need a little extra TLC in order to get the patch applied. If you're in triage mode, don't let perfect be the enemy of good. And that's going to be a recurring theme in this talk.
Yep. All right. Next slide. Next, and this is where it probably changes a little bit. Most people, your default thinking is, oh, servers connect to the internet, so next I should do all the servers inside. No, because it's less likely to be attacked at first. Okay, at first. It will be attacked eventually. Next, focus on your clients. This is your Windows desktops, your Mac desktops, whatever people are using for their endpoint devices, whether it's a terminal server, a laptop, a desktop, iPads, Android tablets, phones, whatever it is. These things reach out to the internet. Now, I was feeling a little snarky when I wrote these slides here, but like most of the client software we're concerned about here, right? It's designed to go out to the internet, download executable code from arbitrary locations, and run it. Like that's the definition of a browser. Okay. So, one, take out of your head that users can do something wrong to get compromised. I mean, they can, but they don't have to do anything wrong. You could be the most conscious security user on the planet and be totally pwned and have no idea, right? It's just the way it is, just by browsing the internet, because you're going out to websites, downloading arbitrary code, executing it on your devices. That's what a web page is. Okay. So these are systems that we need to patch because Microsoft Office, Adobe PDF products, browsers, various different mobile apps, including your mail clients, etc., the host operating system of these underlying systems, right? The mobile devices themselves. Now, the categories that I pulled out here, right, for the clients and the client software, those are kind of categories for software that are all in that CISA known exploited catalog. All right, every single one of them. Okay, so you have to focus on those things next because, well, if you get access to those clients, you're eventually going to get access to everything else. Next, the third attack path. Next is we focus on all of those internal servers, database servers, your internal web applications, file servers, IoT devices. This could be printers, can be anything else on the internal network because the attacker is going to get access either one via an internet accessible system or two from a compromised client device. And then it's going to use those systems to pivot and attack the other internal systems. Right. So your internal servers are probably the last step. Okay. It's the last place the attackers are going to go because that's where the data is. When they get the data that they want, why would they keep going? Right. It's like the joke that it's always the last place you look when you're trying to find something. Well, yeah, because unless you're an idiot, you stop looking, right? So the attackers aren't going to keep hacking after they've compromised everything they want to get access to. Okay. But this is going to be their last stop. So patch in the order of the path that the attackers are likely to take. Right.
Now, I had a former student just text me and said, Mick, this is all well and good, but we've got problems in our patching program. How are we going to go through a backlog while we still have our other security projects to do? And I think that's a fantastic question. And there's a couple different ways that you can approach that. And John, I'd like to hear your take on that awesome question
Sure.
too. For starters, one, you should have, at least, fingers crossed, I hope you should have some sort of a crisis response process where people, resources, teams get pulled away from their normal project work or normal business as usual to address a particular like critical issue. And I would think that given the heightened state of tensions, now's a good time to consider executing that for something as critical as missing patches. The other thing that you can consider doing is potentially start altering your patch process. Now, I'm going to be very clear here. If you're in a highly regulated industry like FDA, where there's like the 6-month patch validation process, do not go afoul of that. Don't violate the NERC SIP standards and apply patches that haven't yet been validated. But for many organizations, what you can do is a faster rollout of where you test it out on a few machines after you've gone through a patch in non-prod, then roll it out to a few prod, then maybe 10% of your production environment, then 30%, and then most, and then leaving your most critical applications last and get them rolled out. I would much rather that you get patches deployed sooner and having a better coverage than worrying about like perfect patching.
Yeah. The other thing that I would say to that is like what like my mind always jumps to weird things, but like what I pictured was, and we've all done it at some point, right? Like you're doing a thing, you're carrying something, and you're focusing on maybe like walking with a cup of coffee, make sure it doesn't spill, or carrying something, make sure you don't drop it. And then all of a sudden, like you start to fall, right? You trip, you fall, or you're crossing the street and like there's a car coming, and you try to like maintain control of that coffee cup or whatever it is, instead of just like tossing it to the side and catching yourself so you don't like break your face. Okay. What parts of your security program are like worrying about the coffee cup when you need to be worried about saving your face? Okay. Like there's going to be aspects of your program that would maybe get put on hold, or projects that are outside of that steady state operation that need to be evaluated and say, what's the criticality here? How much is that going to help right now in our efforts? Or is that just time and effort that would be better directed towards um, immediate actions that we should be taking because we're about to be under attack, right? So I reevaluate.
Yep. The next section I want to chat about is logging. Now, we could have a whole series of webinars on this, and based off of audience interest, I would love to do that. I've done incident response now for over 15 years, and one of the things that always makes me sad is organizations come to me and say, hey, we didn't see the attack coming. And I look at the logs and I say, yeah, you didn't see it because you weren't looking. See, a lot of organizations are doing things from a logging perspective that really don't make sense. Item number one, the developers and you know people who set up operating systems, right? The publishers, the people who do the applications, they're nice and fine people. I'm not throwing any shade at them, but they have an impossibly difficult job. Their job is to set up logging that will work everywhere. Period. And that's insane if you think about it, given the variance of how all of our networks globally are going to look. So you have to start thinking about I can't just take the logs as they exist. I'm going to have to tailor them. You wouldn't go to a high fancy formal dinner in a suit that you bought right off the rack, right? You would likely get it tailored so that it looks really sharp and crisp and you just look that much more polished. So too with logging. And so what you need to start doing is shifting how you're using logs. Now, I want to be clear, a lot of logging is driven by compliance requirements. Absolutely hit those compliance requirements, but they can do so much more. And what you should be doing is using your logs to tell stories. And so, what I would advocate that you do as a strategic objective is log from more systems, but also consider reducing your retention times. Now, I know some of you are probably already freaking out. The good news is every single framework that I have ever seen where they mandate that you need to log things and retain it for, however long, they always have some wording along the lines of materially important information. So if somebody is doing a business critical transaction, you would log that. But if somebody, does something that isn't materially important, that frees you up. For instance, DNS logs age like milk. Think about it. If you're logging DNS traffic, the likelihood of a malicious site being evil after, say, a couple days, even, let alone a week, is almost non existent. And so, what you could do is maybe retain your DNS logs for a far shorter time period. And so, what I want you to start doing is thinking about logging differently. Now, I teach Security 555. It's a 6-day course all about logging and log analysis. So, what I'm going to do is share with you a couple just super high level elements that are from this class and things that I've learned over the 2 decades now that I've been doing this sort of work. First of all, your desktops generate far lower volume of logs than servers. Most organizations shy away from logging on the desktop because they worry about, their events per second or gigs per day licensing costs. And I want to assure you that you can actually make this be a very manageable volume. For the clients that let us really filter and tune their logging, most of my clients, we can get the logs down to 1 megabyte of logs per host per day. When you load up a web page, that's almost always larger than what we just covered. 1 meg per host per day, you absolutely can do that. And I've got clients that are literally over 300,000 associates, and they're doing that. So you can do that too, regardless of your size. The other thing is, logs can be filtered. Even in highly regulated environments, not all logs are created equal. I don't mean to throw any shade at Microsoft, but if you look at the Windows event logs, I mean, how many people have looked through that? The signal to noise ratio on that is actually quite poor. You probably can do an amazing job of filtering the volume of logs that you're consuming and not substantially tell the stories. It gets back to that very first element on the top of this slide. Tell stories with your logs. Don't just gather logs for the sake of gathering logs. And then start getting even a little more creative. Maybe once you start filtering logs that are of no interest, maybe you can remove fields that are of no interest. And I know this sounds like a little weird, but most of the organizations that do this are shocked that they can get about a 60% or more storage cut in terms of the size of the logs that they're sending into their logging infrastructure. So start thinking about it. And one item that I would encourage you to do is just start flat out doing math. Most organizations think that logging servers, desktops, and network devices is roughly equivalent. These devices are all the same, and they absolutely are not. And you shouldn't treat them as such. So, what you should focus on are the servers that have the data that you care about, and start telling the stories of who's touching that data. How are they touching that data? Are they doing things that are unexpected? And once you start going down this path, I assure you that you're going to start learning a ton of great info. So start playing in this space. You'll be surprised at how fast you learn what you need to do.
All right, so defensive technique 3, outbound traffic. We need to control and monitor outbound traffic. Now, Mick and I kind of went round and round on this one because we're looking for things that we could do and do well in a relatively short period of time. And like at the end of the day, like we just kind of came down to, this takes a ton of effort, is a ton of work. However, we're going to talk about some things that you can do to ease into it, some steps to take first to kind of walk these things in. Now, there's 4 different ways we're going to talk about it. We're going to talk about some firewall rules. We'll talk about web content filtering, DNS content filtering, and then network monitoring tools. All right. Now, all of this matters because the attackers aren't magic. Okay. They need internet connectivity and such so that they can deliver their exploits, deliver payloads, send their command and control traffic. We're looking for anything we can to either detect that traffic, disrupt that traffic, or just prevent it in the first place, right? So firewall rules. We want to deny traffic anywhere it doesn't need to go. Now, if your organization doesn't do business in Europe or Eastern Europe or Asia or wherever, do you really need your web server to be able to initiate communications out? Right? I can't think of a good reason that my website would ever initiate a connection to Russia. Right? So let's just block those IPs. Now I can hear the voice in your head that's like, whoa, but wouldn't they just attack from like AWS in the United States? Possibly, but let's make them do that, right? Let's take away the easy things. And that's what we're looking to do. So limit that traffic. We want to tighten it down and do the egress filtering, create rules so that only critical traffic is allowed through. Next, we're going to do some web content control, okay? Web content filtering. Usually your next gen firewalls, web proxies, whatever, they should have some means of doing this quite often. Now, it may require some licensing. As we built this list, we were trying to find things that we could do either cheaply or with built-in capabilities. Now, I was looking for different tools. There's some open source stuff out there that you can use, but no matter what, there are options that you can use to help reduce the amount of traffic that's going out to uh, already known malicious sites, maybe even not even related to a nation state attacker. It's just going to known adware, spyware, or general malware sites. We just block access to that. It's going to free you up to work on other things because you're not going to be cleaning up the computers that would have been infected otherwise. Um, Attackers will use domains regularly for their command and control traffic, for delivering malware, for the phishing links, etc. Those domains end up in categorized databases, or categorized in databases, and then your web content control allows access to or from those different places on the internet. Well, that means that one, it has to stand up the site. Then it has to submit, the attacker would have to submit that site to the categorization company, right? Whoever's doing that categorization, get it categorized, and then keep it in that category until they start delivering attacks from it. That's a lot harder than just buying a domain, setting up a malicious site, and sending a phishing email. That takes more time, effort, etc. Make them go through that time and effort. So block uncategorized domains. These are domains that don't have a category. Okay, you can have a process to get those things approved and review them. It is kind of a slog. It's not exactly fun, but it works. Right? Block unnecessary web traffic and reduce the noise. So block ads if you can. Block malicious sites, known bad IP addresses. This is where those big long lists of bad IP addresses that you get that some people call threat intelligence, that's not really threat intelligence. Those things are actually useful here because we just block access to them. Either use those to feed your firewall rules or feed your web content control, right? Now, if you don't have a firewall or a web proxy to be able to do that level of control here, maybe consider using DNS content filtering. There's a lot of different options out there that will do the same domain-based category blocking, all just through a DNS server. And the way it does it is that you request a domain, and the domain says, or the DNS server says, that's an untrusted category. So, hey, maybe we'll send you to this redirected page that says, hey, that's a nasty site page instead. Okay. And either way, it disrupts the delivery of the payloads. That forces the attacker to then deliver their payloads either if the return path has to go by IP address, not by domain, right? And so it, again, changes what the attacker can and cannot do during the attack. And the last piece here, network monitoring tools. This is where we start looking for outbound traffic that's just odd. There's a lot of different options out there. A lot of open source packages. I mean, everything from the old school Snort to like a full featured setup, kind of like a security onion, right? There's the reading utility from the active countermeasures folks. These are tools that will look at all of the traffic leaving your environment. And some have like signatures to identify weird traffic. Other things will just analyze all the traffic from 24 hours and do like statistical analysis and say, hey, this host it appears to be beaconing to this host over here. You might want to look into that. And it gives you a place to go start and start hunting and draws your attention to potentially weird traffic. You kind of need to do a combination of all these things to make it work.
Now, there's an interesting point that we've crossed over now. These next elements are going to go a little faster. You'll notice we're running thin on time. That's okay. That was a deliberate choice. We were focusing on how to prevent and detect a little bit earlier. Now we're moving toward the response and how to make things a little bit better. So the first of these is technique number 4, how to do faster containment. And one of the things that you have to start realizing is that if you can move faster, right? We've given you things to make your systems more resilient to attack, more tamper evident to attack. Once you see that that's happening, you now need to be able to up your response speed. And one of the best things that you can do, whether regardless of the size of your organization or whatever market vertical, I've globally seen everyone can get better at responding or interdicting with the adversaries. A lot of the problems that I see is organizations have well meaning but just flat out wrong policies. They'll say something like, if you see an attack take place, go contact the line of business and get approval from them, submit an emergency change request, and then you can put in a firewall request. And that's great because when every second counts, help is only an hour or so away. And that's if everything lines up. Sometimes it might even be the end of business before you get all those people together. So you have to come up with ways of speeding things up. And the best way to do this is actually not a technical thing. You want to have a written pre-authorization to take systems offline or do some sort of interdiction, whatever that is, whether it's unplug a network cable. I generally try to shy away from powering off systems just because that could destroy memory-based evidence. But you need to come up with ways that you interdict that will really wreck the attacker's day. And we've already covered a lot of these, things like firewall rules. You can't attack what you can't reach. Attackers will steal passwords and use those passwords. So lock out accounts, disable accounts, do password changes, drill those. A lot of organizations get very gun shy when I start talking about that. But if you don't drill them now, when your moment of truth comes, you're going to have a very hard time. And don't just do it for normal user accounts, really lean in. The one account group that everybody always gets very, very scared about is service accounts. Oh, we can't change a service account password because everything will break. Well, if that's true, what are you going to do when you have to change that account? Because that day will come. And actually, that day never should come, though. You should be using service managed accounts where Windows Active Directory will update the passwords in an automated fashion for you. But that's for another talk. Instead, you need to plan in advance that you have to have these interdictions. In the very last page of the PDF that we referenced at the top of this talk, we have a pre-authorization form. Use it or use something like it so that you can make action immediately when the time comes. So understand that attacks are brittle. And if you don't believe me, I'll be posting this on Twitter. There was a talk and a blog posting from over 10 years ago now called Offense in Depth by Raphael Mudge, the guy who wrote Cobalt Strike. And he talks about how hard it is, even then, to do offensive measures, and how things like a firewall change, a service being uninstalled or disabled, or patched, or configured appropriately, all of these things can make it very, very tough for the attacker. So don't think about the firewall. Don't think about the EDR. Think about how all of these things can work in concert to form a security fabric that works together. The last technical control that we want to talk about is one that John and I went round and round on. This is probably the most controversial one, at least I think it is application control. For those of you who aren't familiar with it, application control, it used to be called application whitelisting. The idea behind application control is that you either inside the operating system itself or using a third-party tool, you prevent applications from even launching. Now, the impetus behind this is amazing, right? It prevents attackers from putting unknown executables on a machine and having that executable work, which is awesome. I love that function, I love that capability. But many organizations are incredibly shy about using these sorts of technologies because if it's misconfigured, they're going to have a system that is basically a brick. Because if a user tries to run an executable that they need for their daily job functions, or that server tries to run an executable that it needs to do some business critical transaction, it's not going to run if it's on the exclusion list. So there has to be a better way of doing this. And one of the things that I would encourage you to do is take advantage of every resource you have available to you. And one that too few know about is a thing built into Windows called the System Resource Usage Monitor, or SRUM. And this is a 30-day rolling window. It's a database that controls has a list of every application that has run on that system for the last 30 days. So what I like to do is for my clients, I will say, okay, here's a group in Active Directory. I'm going to do this analysis on all their machines, and all the people in this group have these executables in the last 30 days that they ran. So via Active Directory group policy, or GPO, right, group policy orchestration, I will push down a config that allows those applications that we observed in the last 30 days and nothing more to be enabled. And now, as an attacker, I am really having to work because I can't bring my own attack code. And I have to only use the tools that that user used in that time frame. And it's very, very challenging. So please start moving in that path. John, you do pen testing. Before I move on, you do pen testing. How frequently do you get tripped up on application control when you encounter it?
It's a really big pain because, like Mick said, you're limited to the tools that are allowed to run, and I think sometimes the the biggest trap that the attackers fall into sometimes is not necessarily that we've completely blocked, but sometimes the tools you use as you put in these application control tools, there will be um, kind of a monitor mode or maybe just an alert mode. It doesn't actually stop anything, and as the attacker, I can't see that. So things are just going for me all swimmingly, but it's firing alerts like crazy to people that I'm running weird commands for things that that user's never done before. And it's an easy way to get caught. And when it is in blocking mode, good grief,
Yeah.
right? Uh,
Also, the other thing too, for those of you who really want to be an Apex defender, a very easy detect is look for somebody checking to see if these things are running and in enforcement mode. Because Bob in HR doesn't even know that this technology exists. If his account is looking for it, something's up. Investigate. The last thing that we want to talk with is to give you hope, okay? A lot of the well meaning folks that are flat out wrong online are just saying, hey, you know everything that we've been telling you to do for the last decades, and you've got a years of backlog of technical debt? Do it now. Start drinking a lot of really strong caffeine. Don't sleep. Go, 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 go. And that is just stupid. If you watched the webcast that Sands put on last Friday, Jake Williams gave a very, very important bit of tradecraft, and he said more organizations are going to cause outages and disruptions to themselves in how they respond to this than the actual adversaries. And that's a sobering thought. So, what you should start doing is realizing the fact that we're even having this webcast is a sign of a bigger problem in the industry, and that is that we don't have a sustainable approach to how we do information security. So, start building that up. Start figuring out how you can make meaningful and impactful changes day over day that result in actually moving the needle forward. And the best thing that I want you to start doing is stop thinking about a perfect goal. What you should be thinking about is making something less painful. each and every day. How can I make it so that I'm able to do my job a bit easier, a bit faster, a bit more reliable? That's our goal. Our goal in IT, our goal in information security is not to get that checkbox on, hey, we've got this particular control set enabled and it's working great. Our goal is to make it so that that checkbox is easier and easier to check each time we go about doing it. So just wanted to say thank you. Thank you all. John, thank you so much. I really appreciate your help in building this. I owe you in a way that I won't ever be able to pay back. Thank you, Sans, and thank you all for attending. This was awesome. I hope that this is the start of a new conversation and a new way of thinking about doing information security, because you can fight, you can win. Don't listen to the people that are haters.